All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works, right? We take whatever you're working with in your case, stuff that a politician has to deal with every day, and we try to pull out some really useful insights, some key takeaways, and, it's a deep dive.
Exactly, a deep dive.
This time, it's a big one, though. We're going all the way back to the foundation of so much political thought, Politics, Book 5.
This one's a classic.
And we really want to tailor this exploration specifically for you, for someone in the thick of it all, in the political arena,
Yeah.
because we understand those pressures you face, the need to not just deal with what's happening today, but to really get a sense of where things are heading. So our mission, if you want to call it that.
Like a political strategy session.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
drawn from like centuries of observation.
Yeah, a strategy session from history, that's exactly it. We want to use this text, Politics, to help you understand how and why political systems change, but also, just as important, how they actually manage to survive, to endure.
That resilience, yeah.
So let's jump right in. First things first. How do different kinds of constitutions, different systems of government even come about in the first place? What's the origin story there?
Well, one of the most fascinating takeaways from politics is that it all comes down to disagreements, right? At the heart of it, it's about fundamental disagreements about what's fair, what's just.
And when you say disagreements about fairness, what are those really about?
Fairness in terms of how power and resources are shared, how they're distributed, basically how much each person or each group gets, and is that really their proportionate share? That's what sparks different constitutional forms.
So it's not necessarily that people don't believe in justice. It's just that
They have very different ideas about what justice actually looks like.
different interpretations. Okay, so how does that play out? How does this difference in what justice means actually shape the kind of government a society ends up with? I mean, take democracy, for example. Politics says that democracy comes from a certain perspective on equality.
Yeah, and it's this idea that if people are equal in one fundamental way, let's say just by being free citizens, then that equality should apply to everything,
It should extend it
to every part of political life. Yeah, like an equal in one thing, equal in everything kind of approach.
Okay, I see. So that's the driving force behind democracy, according to this. Now, on the flip side, what about oligarchy? How does that form of government come about? What's the thinking there?
Oligarchy, as politics describes it, often springs up from almost the opposite belief. It's this idea that if you have inequality in one area, like wealth, then, well, that inequality should determine everything else.
It becomes like a justification for a whole time.
Hierarchy, yeah, a hierarchical system where those who have more of that one thing, they deserve more power and influence.
So both systems, both democracy and oligarchy, they're built on these ideas of justice. But as politics points out, those ideas can be flawed, incomplete.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's when things get interesting, right? That's when you start to see factions emerging, people feeling like the way things are set up, the Constitution itself, doesn't reflect what they see as just.
Exactly. That gap between what a group believes is right, is fair, and what the Constitution actually delivers, that's a huge driver of conflict, of factions forming and pushing for change.
Now, here's a bit of a curveball that politics throws at us. The text says that the people who maybe have the best claim to knowing what's right, the truly virtuous, they're often the least likely to get involved in all this faction stuff.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It is. So why would that be?
Well, the text suggests it's because these highly virtuous individuals, they're not really driven by personal ambition or a need to be on top. They're more focused on what's best for everyone, for the community as a whole.
So they're more likely to put up with things that maybe aren't perfect, as long as it means the community is stable and, generally doing okay.
Exactly. They're playing the long game, looking at the bigger picture.
That's a really interesting perspective, especially nowadays when things feel so polarized. And then, on the other hand, politics mentions these people who feel like they deserve more power just because they come from a fancy family, inherited privilege and all that.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic source of conflict. You have this idea of being born into a certain status clashing head on with the idea that, power should be earned or at least spread around more fairly.
So basically, all these disagreements about what's just, what's fair, they're not just abstract ideas. They actually shape the kinds of governments that societies create, and they also create the potential for those governments to change, to be overthrown, to be reformed.
Absolutely. It's like the seed of instability is right there from the start.
Okay, so we've talked about how different constitutions come about. Now let's get into what actually causes them to change. Politics lays out two main ways that this happens as a result of, all of these factions and disagreements.
Right. The first one is, like the big one, a complete transformation. We're talking about a total change of the Constitution. One form of government gets completely replaced by another.
So like a democracy being overthrown and replaced with an oligarchy, or the other way around?
Exactly. Those are usually pretty dramatic and chaotic times.
Major upheavals.
Totally.
And then there's the second kind of change within the existing Constitution. This seems a bit more subtle, like fine-tuning, rather than blowing up the whole machine.
Yeah, it's more about adjusting the existing system, maybe shifting the balance of power between different groups without actually changing the whole structure.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? What are some examples of this kind of internal change that politics talks about?
Well, you might see like an oligarchy gradually opening up, becoming less strict about who can participate. Or, and politics gives some really interesting historical examples of this, you might have factions targeting very specific parts of the system.
Like changing how certain officials are chosen, or even getting rid of certain positions altogether.
Exactly. Politics talks about Lysander and the Spartan kingship and King Pausanias and the overseership. And remember that one about Epidamnus where a council replaced the tribal rulers?
Yeah, so these are all about factions, basically trying to reshape the government from the inside.
Right. They're not trying to overthrow the whole system, but they are trying to get more power for themselves or for their group.
So whether it's a complete overhaul or just tinkering with the system, it all comes back to this idea of faction and disagreement.
Yeah.
But what's at the root of it all? What's the fundamental issue that keeps driving these factions? Politics seems to point to something very basic about human nature: inequality and the desire for equality.
Yeah, it really boils down to that, doesn't it? People feeling like they're not getting their fair share, that things are unequal, and they're driven to either get more or to make sure everyone has the same.
It's like a constant push and pull between those who feel they deserve more and those who feel everyone should have the same.
Yeah.
But politics also points out that there are actually two different kinds of equality that people are fighting for.
Right, and this is important. It's not just about wanting equality in general, it's about what kind of equality we're talking about.
Okay, so break that down for us. What are these two types of equality?
Well, you have numerical equality, which is basically about everyone getting the exact same amount, regardless of anything else.
Like one person, one vote?
Exactly, or maybe a universal basic income where everyone gets the same amount of money.
Okay, and what's the other kind?
The other kind is proportional equality. This is about making sure that people receive in proportion to what they contribute or what they deserve based on some kind of measure of worth.
So it's not about everyone getting the same amount, it's about getting what's fair based on some criteria.
Exactly. Politics uses this simple example with numbers. Like, numerically, 3 is 1 more than 2, and 2 is 1 more than 1. But proportionally, 4 is double 2, and 2 is double 1. So it's about ratios, not just absolute numbers.
I see. And in a political context, this could apply to things like taxes, where people with higher incomes pay a higher percentage.
Exactly. But here's the catch, and this is what drives so much conflict. Even if everyone agrees on this idea of proportional justice, the big question becomes, well, what determines a person's worth? How do you measure that?
That's where all the different interpretations of justice come back in, right?
Exactly. Different groups will prioritize different things. Wealth, family background, virtue, contribution to society, you name it.
And those different interpretations are what fuel the ongoing struggle for power and resources.
Absolutely. It's the engine that keeps the whole political machine running, and sometimes it can make that machine break down too.
So we've got the underlying problem of inequality and these different ways that people understand and pursue equality. Now, let's dig into the specific triggers, the things that actually make people form factions and push for change. Politics goes into a lot of detail here, so let's try to break it down. First, it talks about the dispositions of people who get involved in this stuff.
Right. It's about the mindset. And politics highlights two main ones. You have people who feel like they're being denied equality, they're being deprived of what they deserve. And then you have those who feel like they're superior, that they deserve more than others.
Okay, so you have the have-nots who are fighting for what they see as their rightful share, and then you have the haves who are trying to hold on to what they have and maybe even get more.
That's it in a nutshell. And these mindsets, they translate into specific motivations for getting involved in politics.
And what are those motivations that politics identifies?
Well, the big ones are profit and honor, or avoiding the opposite, losing money and being dishonored.
So pretty basic stuff.
Yeah.
People want more money, more status, and they don't want to lose what they already have.
It's as old as human nature itself, and it's still driving politics today.
Absolutely. Now let's get into the specifics. Politics gives us a whole list of specific things that can spark factions and lead to change. What are some of the highlights?
Well, it starts off by saying that it's not just about people wanting profit and honor for themselves. It's also about seeing others gain, whether it's deserved or not. That feeling of being left behind or seeing someone else get ahead unfairly, that's a powerful motivator.
So even if you're doing okay yourself, seeing someone else get a bigger slice of the pie can be enough to get you riled up.
Exactly. And for someone in politics, this means that it's not just about making sure things are fair. It's also about making sure they look fair to everyone.
Perception matters.
Absolutely. Then politics talks about things like officials abusing their power, using public funds for personal gain, that kind of thing.
That's a classic, right? Corruption always leads to trouble.
It erodes trust, it makes people angry, and it creates a perfect opportunity for opponents to rally against the government.
And then there's dishonor, which, interestingly, politics says can be both unjust and just.
Yeah, that's a subtle point, but it's important. Even if someone deserves to be punished or demoted, they might still feel resentment. They might still try to get revenge.
So even when you're doing the right thing, you have to be careful about how it's perceived, how it might make people feel.
Absolutely. You always have to think about the consequences of your actions, even the ones that seem justified.
Okay, what else does politics highlight as a cause of faction and change?
Well, there's this idea of an individual or a group becoming so powerful that they basically overshadow the rest of the city, the existing political system.
Like a really popular general or a powerful family.
Exactly. And that can either lead to them taking over completely, or it can trigger a backlash from those who feel threatened by their power.
And politics actually mentions ostracism, which the ancient Greeks used to get rid of people who became too powerful. It's like they recognized that this kind of outsized influence could be really dangerous.
Yeah, it's like a safety valve for the system. And then there's fear, which politics says can come from a couple of different places.
Fear what?
Well, it could be fear of punishment for something you did in the past, or fear that someone is going to do something bad to you in the future.
Like a preemptive strike kind of thing.
Exactly. Politics gives this example of the nobles in Rhodes who all banded together because they were afraid of being sued. So fear can be a powerful force for uniting people, but it can also be really destabilizing.
And then there's contempt, which politics says plays out differently in oligarchies and democracies.
Yeah, in an oligarchy, it's often the people who are excluded from power, who feel contempt for the rulers. They see them as incompetent or corrupt.
And in a democracy.
It's often the other way around. The wealthy and the powerful look down on the masses. They see them as unruly and irresponsible.
So in both cases, you have this mutual distrust and disrespect that can really poison the well.
Exactly. And then politics talks about what happens when one part of the city grows too quickly, either in terms of numbers or wealth.
So it was like a sudden influx of poor people or the rich getting way richer.
Yeah, right. And that can throw things out of balance. In a democracy, a large number of poor people might start demanding more radical changes. And in an oligarchy, the rich might feel like they deserve more power to match their wealth.
So even something like demographic change can be a trigger for political upheaval.
Absolutely. And then politics gets into some really interesting specific examples, like how the way elections are run can become a problem.
Like that example of Harea switching to lot selection instead of voting.
Exactly. If people feel like the system for choosing leaders is rigged or unfair, they're going to demand change. And then there's the danger of just being careless, of letting people who don't believe in the Constitution get into positions of power.
Like the example of Heracliodorus and Aureus.
Mm.
It's a reminder that you have to be really careful about who you trust with authority.
For sure. And then politics makes this really interesting point about how small, seemingly insignificant changes can build up over time and eventually lead to big problems.
Like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. They use the example of Ambracia gradually lowering the property requirement for voting, which eventually led to a major shift in the balance of power. So you have to be aware of the long-term consequences of even small decisions.
It's about thinking strategically, anticipating how things might play out down the line.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the issue of racial and ethnic differences, which has been a source of conflict throughout history.
And politics gives a whole bunch of examples of how this is played out in different city-states. It's a reminder that integrating diverse populations can be really challenging, and if it's not done carefully, it can lead to all sorts of problems.
For sure. And finally, politics talks about how even something as simple as geography can create divisions.
Like coastal cities versus inland cities having different interests.
Exactly. Geography can shape people's livelihoods, their cultures, and ultimately, their political views.
So all these different factors, from big things like inequality to small things like geography, they can all contribute to the formation of factions and the potential for political change. And at the end of this section, politics uses this great analogy, comparing these small differences to small ditches that can disrupt a phalanx in war.
Yeah, it's a powerful image. It shows how even seemingly minor issues can create vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and how those vulnerabilities can ultimately lead to the downfall of the whole system.
Now, politics also spends some time talking about how these factions often start with small things, but can quickly grow into big problems. And the text is especially concerned about small factions that form among the leaders.
Right, because when the people at the top start fighting amongst themselves, it can quickly spread and draw in everyone else.
Politics uses this dramatic example of a love affair in Syracuse that actually led to a major political upheaval. It's a reminder that personal dramas among the elite can have huge political consequences.
Yeah, and the text really emphasizes the importance of dealing with these kinds of conflicts early on before they have a chance to blow up. There's this great line, the starting point is half the whole.
So nipping those little disputes in the bud, especially among the leaders, is crucial for maintaining stability.
Absolutely. And then politics gives us a couple more examples of how these small personal conflicts can turn into big problems. There's the inheritance dispute in Hestia, where a fight between two brothers ended up dragging the whole city into their feud.
It's like those family arguments that escalate way out of control. And then there are the marriage alliances, which were obviously a big deal in the ancient world.
Yeah, marriage was often a way of cementing political alliances. So when those alliances broke down, it could lead to all sorts of conflict. Politics gives a bunch of examples of how this happened in different city-states.
So it's a reminder that personal relationships, especially among the elite, can have big political ramifications. Now let's talk about how the balance of power can shift within a constitution. Politics says that sometimes a particular office or part of the city can gain more prestige or power, and that can lead to demands for change.
Right. It's like when one part of the system becomes more successful or influential, and then they start demanding more recognition or control.
Politics gives some great examples of this, like how the Areopagus in Athens gained more power after the Persian Wars, or how the sailors who fought at Salamis helped to strengthen the Athenian democracy.
And then there's that example from Argos, where the nobles gain more influence after a victory at Mantinea. It's like success can be a double-edged sword.
It can upset the existing balance of power.
Exactly. And politics suggests that this often leads to conflict, either because the newly powerful group wants more, or because others are jealous and want to cut them back down to size.
It's like that saying, the more you have, the more you want.
Yeah, and politics is very clear that this kind of ambition can be dangerous for any political system.
Now let's talk about balance, or rather the lack of it. Politics says that constitutions can become unstable when opposing groups, like the rich and the poor, become too evenly matched, especially if there's a weak middle class to act as a buffer.
This is a really important point, especially in today's world where we see so much polarization. When the extremes are strong and the center is weak, it's very difficult to find compromise and maintain stability.
And politics gives the example of the 400 in Athens, who were able to seize power through deception during a time of intense political division.
It's a reminder that when a system is already fragile, it's much easier for someone to come in and exploit that weakness, either through force or manipulation.
So a strong middle class is crucial for keeping things in check. Now let's talk about some of the specific vulnerabilities of different types of government. Politics starts with democracies, and it identifies a couple of key weaknesses.
Yeah, one of the big ones is the danger of popular leaders, those charismatic figures who can rally the masses but also lead them astray.
Politics talks about how these leaders can stir up trouble by going after the wealthy, bringing false accusations, that kind of thing.
Exactly. They can create this atmosphere of fear and resentment that can really destabilize democracy. And politics also points out that historically, a lot of these popular leaders were also military generals.
That's interesting. Is there a connection there?
Well, Politics suggests that in the past, military skill was often seen as the most important qualification for leadership. So these generals already had a lot of power and prestige, and if they were also popular with the people, it was easier for them to take over.
Like a recipe for tyranny.
Exactly. And then politics talks about how democracies can sometimes evolve in a way that actually undermines their own stability.
How does that happen?
Well, it starts with politicians trying to outdo each other in how much they pander to the people. They keep promising more and more, giving the people more and more direct control over the laws, until eventually the whole system becomes too chaotic and unstable.
It's like too much of a good thing can be bad.
Exactly. And politics suggests a remedy for this. Instead of having everyone vote on everything, maybe go back to a system where officials are nominated by smaller groups, like tribes or districts.
So a bit more filtering, bit more deliberation. Okay, now what about oligarchies? What are their weaknesses?
Well, oligarchies always face the problem of resentment from the people who are excluded from power.
It's built into the system.
Exactly. And politics says that if the oligarchs aren't careful, if they treat the masses too unjustly, it can easily lead to rebellion.
And the text gives the example of Ligdames of Naxos, who actually overthrew the oligarchy he was a part of.
It's a reminder that even within an oligarchy, there can be individuals who are willing to challenge the status quo, especially if they see an opportunity to gain power for themselves. And then politics talks about how internal divisions within the ruling class can also be a big problem for oligarchies.
So it's not just about the masses versus the elite, it's also about the elite fighting amongst themselves.
Exactly. Politics gives a bunch of examples of how this has happened, often because there are only a limited number of positions of power, and everyone's scrambling for those
It's
spots.
like a game of musical chairs with very high stakes.
Yeah, and politics also points out that oligarchs can sometimes get into trouble with their own personal finances.
Brainy.
Well, if they squander their wealth and become vulnerable, they might be tempted to make risky political moves, maybe even try to establish a tyranny to protect themselves.
So personal responsibility can have political consequences.
Absolutely. And then politics talks about how war and peace can both pose challenges for oligarchies.
How so?
Well, in wartime, oligarchies might have to rely on mercenaries, and those mercenaries can become a threat to their power. And in peacetime, the oligarchs might become complacent and start fighting amongst themselves, or they might hire mercenary guards to protect them, and those guards can end up taking over.
It's like they're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. And then politics gives a few more examples of how oligarchies can fall apart. Factions forming because of personal feuds, people getting fed up with overly harsh rule, even things like changes in property assessments causing unexpected shifts in power.
So it's like there are all these different pressure points that can make an oligarchy collapse.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balancing act.
Now let's talk about aristocracies and polities. Yeah. What makes these mixed regimes vulnerable?
Well, aristocracies, which are supposed to be ruled by the best and the brightest, they can run into trouble if there are people who feel like they should be part of the ruling class but are being excluded.
Like they're virtuous enough, but they're not getting the recognition they deserve.
Exactly. And politics gives examples of this happening in Sparta, where certain groups felt like they were being marginalized.
And then there's the danger of powerful individuals who might not be super virtuous, but who still have a lot of influence.
Yeah, those are the wild cards. And of course, there's always the risk that someone might try to seize power and establish a monarchy.
That's the perennial threat to any aristocracy. Now, what about polities? Those are the regimes that try to balance democratic and oligarchic elements.
Right, and politics says that they're especially vulnerable to anything that upsets that balance, whether it's a shift towards more democracy or more oligarchy.
So it's like they're walking a tightrope.
Exactly. And politics points out that aristocracies that lean too far towards oligarchy are often less stable than polities that have a stronger democratic element.
It's like they need that popular participation to stay healthy.
Yeah, and politics gives a bunch of examples of how polities and aristocracies can become unbalanced. Things like changes in property laws, the consolidation of wealth among the elite, even the influence of powerful neighbors with different systems of government.
So it's a constant struggle to maintain that equilibrium.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've talked a lot about what makes different types of constitutions vulnerable to change and collapse. Now let's shift gears and talk about how to preserve them. Politics offers a bunch of general principles that apply to all forms of government. What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, politics starts by making this really obvious but important point. If you know what destroys a constitution, then you know what you need to do to protect it.
It's like knowing your enemy.
Exactly. And then politics stresses the importance of upholding the law, even in small things.
Like, don't sweat the small stuff.
No, actually the opposite. Politics says that even minor violations of the law can add up and weaken the whole system. It's like those little expenses that you don't think about, but they end up draining your bank account.
So be vigilant. Pay attention to the details.
Exactly. And politics also warns against using deception and trickery to manipulate the people.
Why is that? It seems like a pretty effective way to get what you want.
Well, sure, it might work in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to backfire.
How so?
Because when people realize they've been lied to, they're going to lose trust in the government, and that's going to lead to instability.
So, honesty is the best policy, even in politics.
You know, it's funny how often that turns out to be true.
Now, politics has some specific advice for oligarchies and aristocracies. What's the key to preserve those systems?
Well, politics says that the ruling class needs to be careful about how they treat both their own members and the people who are excluded from power.
So it's not just about being fair to the masses, it's also about being fair to each other.
Exactly. Politics says that oligarchs and aristocrats need to avoid being too greedy or oppressive. They need to bring in talented people from outside their own ranks, and they need to make sure that everyone has a chance to prosper.
So it's about creating a system that's sustainable, that doesn't breed resentment and rebellion.
Exactly. And politics even suggests that adopting some democratic practices within the ruling class can help to prevent things from getting too stagnant and out of touch.
So a bit of internal democracy can actually help to preserve an oligarchy or aristocracy.
It's counterintuitive, but that's what politics seems to be saying. And then there's the idea of using fear to motivate people to support the system.
Fear. That doesn't sound very healthy.
Well, it depends on how it's used. Politics says that a healthy dose of fear, maybe a fear of external enemies or internal chaos, can actually help to unite people and make them appreciate what they have.
So it's like a controlled burn, using a little bit of fear to prevent a bigger fire.
Yeah, something like that. And then politics stresses the importance of managing rivalries within the elite, making sure that those personal conflicts don't escalate and destabilize the whole system.
And that requires a lot of political skill, right? Being able to spot those problems early on and mediate between different factions.
Exactly. It's about being a good leader, not just a good ruler. And then politics talks about the importance of keeping an eye on the distribution of wealth, making sure that it doesn't become too concentrated in the hands of a few.
Because that can lead to inequality and instability, as we talked about earlier.
Right. And politics suggests that regularly adjusting property requirements for voting or holding office can help to keep things in balance.
So you have to be willing to adapt to changing circumstances.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of power, making sure that no one individual or group becomes too powerful too quickly.
That's always a danger, right?
Yeah.
Especially for ambitious leaders.
Yeah, and politics suggests a few ways to deal with that. Promoting people gradually, keeping an eye on their private lives to make sure they're not doing anything shady, and even using banishment as a last resort.
It's like you have to be constantly vigilant, always looking for potential threats to the system.
Exactly. And then politics makes this really important point about balancing different interests within the city, making sure that no one group has too much power.
And strengthening the middle class, right?
Absolutely. That's crucial for maintaining stability.
Now, politics also emphasizes this idea that holding public office should not be a way to get rich. Why is that so important?
Well, because if people see public office as a way to line their own pockets, it's going to lead to corruption and cynicism.
It undermines the whole idea of public service.
Exactly. And politics suggests a few ways to prevent this, making sure that government finances are transparent, rewarding good officials with honor and recognition instead of money, and maybe even making it so that holding office isn't very profitable in the first place.
So making it more about duty and service than personal gain. Now, let's get into some more specific tactics for preserving different types of government. What does politics say about democracies?
Well, for democracies, the main thing is to keep the wealthy in check, make sure they're not accumulating too much power or using their wealth to influence the government.
So things like preventing the redistribution of property or wealth, or making sure that the rich aren't unfairly burdened with taxes or public service obligations.
Exactly. It's about making sure that everyone feels like they have a stake in the system, that it's not just rigged to benefit the wealthy.
Yeah, what about oligarchies?
For oligarchies, it's all about addressing the grievances of the poor and making sure they don't feel like they're being exploited.
So things like providing opportunities for economic advancement, protecting them from abuse by the wealthy, and maybe even giving them some limited political representation.
Exactly. It's about making the system feel a little less unfair, a little more inclusive.
And finally, what's some general advice that politics gives to anyone in a position of leadership?
Well, it says that good leaders need to have a few key qualities: loyalty to the Constitution, competence in their role, and a strong sense of virtue and justice.
So it's not just about being smart or experienced, it's also about being a good person.
Exactly. And politics also suggests that sometimes it's better to prioritize experience over virtue, or vice versa, depending on the specific role.
So it's about matching the person to the job.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the fundamental principle of making sure that the people who support the Constitution are stronger than those who oppose it.
So building a broad base of support for the system.
Exactly. It's